Then the testes line the scrotum. The scrotal skin is rich in muscle fibers and helps the temperature regulation that way, depending if it's contracting a little bit or not. And then the penis is the next external sex organ, and that's anchored firmly to the pelvic floor and the pubic rami in the bottom. A freely movable body, a shaft, consists of 2 corpora cavernosa and 1 corpus spongiosum, and that's on the underside surrounding the urethra. It widens at the tip into a glans penis, and then we have a foreskin, a folded back skin that covers the glans, and that's known as the prepuce. The paired cavernous bodies, what they do during an erection, they swell. And we have a branching artery that runs through the middle portion of and pours a lot of blood into spaces of spongy collagen and elastic fibers, a network. And what we also do when that blood goes in there, we compress the veins that drain it, so the blood is stuck in there. Blood can still drain the corpus spongiosum at any time, and that keeps it relatively soft, making sure that we have a urethra that is open and doesn't get compressed as well. And then when we get to the ejaculation itself, that is a complex process that's controlled by the autonomic nervous system. We have an erection that's under parasympathetic control and an ejaculation that is triggered by the sympathetic nerves. It begins when a spirally arranged smooth muscle of the vas deferens contract, causing it to shorten and to widen at the same time, and that suctions the sperm out of the epididymis. And the prostate and the seminal vesicles also contract at that time. The neck of the bladder will close, driving the ejaculate out through the urethral orifice, the urethral tube, in a rhythmic fashion as the pelvic floor muscle contracts spasmodically. Well, there you have it. Alright, that brings us to the female reproductive organs, and we orient ourselves in the picture. We have here the ovary, we have the fallopian tube, which is a channel from the ovary to then the uterus, which is here, which is the muscle that the baby grows in, the muscle bag, essentially. And that's all we need to know right here. When we have ova, they grow in ovaries, and that then undergo ovulation as one reaches the fallopian tube. So that's ovulation when we get to the fallopian tube. And that's on a monthly basis. After an ovum is fertilized, if it is fertilized, in the ampulla here, this area here, that's the ampulla, the ovum migrates in a fluid stream through the fallopian tube into the uterus, where it then implants and where it nests. And that's called nidation. So that's going in there in a prepared area that lets it be nourished. Within a few days of fertilization, the ovum signals the beginning of pregnancy to the pituitary gland. And if we look back here, we haven't, not quite reached that yet. So the pituitary gland can then secrete hormones, securing the maintenance and the environment for the months to come as the fetus grows. The embryo grows, sorry. The uterine muscle hypertrophies greatly as the embryo grows. Embryonic and maternal tissue creates a placenta which feeds the oxygen and the nutrients to the offspring. So look at this here. This is the uterus normally, and then as we be pregnant, this is how big the uterus can become. So that really is a hypertrophy, a big hypertrophy. And the placenta is back in here. The placenta feeds the offspring. During labor, we have then the uterus, that is a muscle that contracts repeatedly, first pushing out the infant and out of the birth canal through the pelvis, and then expelling the placenta in what we call an afterbirth. The ovaries are equivalent to the testes. They originate from the posterior body wall before they go descending, but they rest between the true and the false pelvis, so they descend a little bit. Ligaments attach them to the pelvic wall. We have suspensory ligament, of the ovary, or we also call that mesovarium, and then we have ovarian ligament that attaches to uterus. The two almond-sized organs, the two almond-sized ovaries, mature and prepare ova, the ovum, in a singular. They also secrete hormones that coordinate the processes of the uterus and the vagina. Inside, the medulla is usually the inside, like in here, right in here, contains blood vessels, while the outer cortex, the outer part, contains ovarian follicles in various stages of maturation. So we have small one until we almost get to the stage right here where it passes out into the fallopian tube. When we further look into the development of the ovum, we have follicles on the outer side in the cortex of each ovary. And in the beginning here we have primary oocytes, oogonia they're also called, and they develop during the fetal period. They all develop during fetal periods. And they remain in that first maturation division until shortly before they become ovulated, when they complete the first meiotic division. And what they do then, if they make the first meiotic division, that's right in here, they become a secondary oocyte, and we also create some polar bodies. And then we have a second meiotic division where we have this is initiated during ovulation, but only completed if the egg is fertilized. So this here is only finished when the egg is fertilized. It produces another polar body and a haploid egg, an ovum. And then this ovum, or actually through the process, the ovum is supported by this follicle that surrounds it, and it provides nutrients to it. And the polar body is basically when the cell divides, most of the cytoplasm gets to the one that will be viable, and the other one doesn't really get anything. And it just most of the time deteriorates and dies off. From a hormonal perspective, FSH is a follicle-stimulating hormone that activates and guides, that's its name, it activates and guides the follicular growth as an ovum develops. It also secretes sex hormones that stimulate uterine mucosal proliferation. We get into that a little bit later. So here is a developing ovum here, and we get cell structure, and then we have a four-chamber called an antrum, and that's filled with a liquor, hyaluronic acid and proteoglycans, and that's within a mature follicle. And then the oocyte is behind that in a other cell cluster of granulosa cells, and that forms the corona radiata around it, and that supplies them by nutrients. So therefore the egg itself, the ovum, is very, very well protected. And a mature follicle, we call that also a Graafian follicle. And when we look at the egg itself, because here then it gets liberated, when we look at the egg itself, we can look over here. The oocyte is covered by a glycoprotein layer, and that's called a zona pellucida, and that becomes instrumental in fertilization. Ovulation, in the middle of the cycle, one of the Graafian follicles moves towards the surface of the ovary, initiating that ovulation, that pop. And that's the Mittelschmerz that the woman notices, or many women notices during that time. The outpouring fluid flows the ovum surrounded by the corona radiata, and then it is suctioned by the ampulla of the fallopian tube by graspy fimbria. Let me see, I have a picture of that. Well, a little bit here. So the ovary is right here, and here are fimbria, this first structure, and there's sort of fingers. You can see better here coming up, and they suction in that ovum with the corona radiata around it. And then from there, If the egg is not fertilized in 12 hours, the ovum will perish and will disappear. Now that brings us to the corpus luteum. Luteinizing hormone transforms the follicular epithelium that's left behind right here into a secreting gland that secretes progesterone, which prepares the uterine mucosa for nidation. So the progesterone does that. It's the secretory phase of the cycle. If fertilization occurs, the germ cells secrete human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG, which in turn stimulates the corpus luteum to secrete more progesterones until about the 4th month of pregnancy. After that, it degenerates and the placenta takes over the function of that function. If not fertilized, it stops functioning about 2 weeks afterwards, and as the progesterone level declines, the uterine mucosa undergoes bleeding or slouching off. And so that brings us then, of course, to the menstrual cycle. So we have that follicle here that gets bigger and bigger and bigger until it's brought out of the ovulation of the ovary, and then the corpus luteum is what we see here as it works with the progesterone. So the menstrual cycle is a monthly mucosal changes that occur in the uterine mucosa from menarche to menopause. That cycle lasts an average of about 28 days, and it starts with the first day of bleeding. The follicular phase ends after the ovulation then comes. And so the bleeding is the follicular phase, and then after we have ovulation, we have a luteal phase. So we have these number phases, and the luteal phase is a secretory phase. That's when we have the progesterone present. So when we look at the hormone progesterone, we see that black line going up right here, and that's the secretory phase. And that's always lasts 14 days. The proliferative phase has a little more fluctuation to it.